recording. Um, we forgot or I forgot, or I've struggled with balancing the self-reflection with the overly analytical brain, and I've had to really develop a sense of grace for myself. But I also have to remind myself through that grace that this is a growing field. Social justice education is a growing field. Science and social justice is an even more baby field, you know? So I have to have that grace with myself, and then I also have to have the research and put in the work. And I'm constantly taking workshops and I'm constantly reading and reaching out to educators. I would say my framework is an anti-racist, feminist, indigenous, abolitionist framework. Let me add abolitionist to that. But those are some of my frameworks that I come to this work through. And that's been over the years. I wasn't like 22 years old and thinking that way. I made a lot of mistakes along the way. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of mistakes. And I'm sure I will still make mistakes. And I say sorry a lot to my students because I'm always making mistakes. But those are my basic frameworks. I see something in the chat. I'm going to check it really quick. Ooh. So when we think about, for me, some of the folks who I go to as like, these are my basic frameworks, bell hooks and Teaching to Transgress. I highly recommend you pick up that book. Basically really shifted my teaching practice and made me realize that teaching is an act of love and that vulnerability in the classroom it's so valuable, right? And reading and critical thinking are incredibly important tools instead of route memorization. Quick story, I can tell so many stories, but when I first started teaching, I was 21, 22 years old. I was teaching in East Oakland, didn't know much about the community. And I started as a substitute teacher, and the admin just liked me. And they were like, hey, a teacher left mid-November. They were a science teacher. We saw you had biology on your resume. Can you come teach? And I was like, that's how I got my start to teaching. And my admin basically told me just to scare the shit out of my students. Just have their moms on speed dial, be super structured, all of these things. And honestly, like as a young woman of color who never had access to power before, I let it get to my head and I was good at it. I was really good at being in that place of power. And everybody thought I was the dopest teacher because my classroom was like super quiet. Everybody was focused. Everybody was doing work. Doesn't mean they were learning. They were doing work. Doesn't mean they were learning, right? They were filling out papers. They were like doing like the definitions of things and things like that. But real critical thinking, real learning, real curiosity, I don't think was going. Maybe a little bit. I wasn't horrible, but not to the point where it should have been, And I think that took for me a lot of realization. I started doing more social justice work. And when Oscar Grant was murdered in Oakland, I was actually here in LA, but I started doing a lot of work around police brutality. And I started learning. Yeah, thank you, Gustavo, for that. And I started learning about, the prison industrial complex and what's going on in the school to prison pipeline. And I realized I was recreating a prison type state in my classroom because it was so fear-based. And I had to do that really deep self-reflection about, if I want us to be free on this outside world, I need to teach that way of being on the inside world. And so Gloria Anzaldua's famous quote, I changed myself, I changed the world. I had to do a lot. I'm still doing so much self-reflection and change and really look at my teaching practice. I also use Native perspectives as part of my into like science frameworks. Thanks, Marini. Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't easy. Wasn't easy. Um, and really looking at who says what is science and how our science that we've come to know it is so Eurocentric and so based on rationality, right? And really devalues spirituality and devalues like participatory, everybody can do science kind of things. And I have to really ask myself, in the European ways, science is meant to triumph over nature. And is that really progress? And I think we can see now with, global warming really coming to fruition, what science has done, or the Western ideas of science has done. And so then reframing it into a more indigenous educational model where it's like, who are we? Who are we going to become? And then as an individual, but then as a collective as well, right? Who are we as our collective? What are our values? What do we want to become? Yes, you will. You'll get a copy. And yay, I'm glad it's resonating. And this is my personal story, right? So yes, I teach and all these things, but I try to stay away from, I'll be honest, academia makes me nervous. So this is just my personal story, And I think really recently, in the past 5 years, 4 or 5 years, really looking at what it means to be an anti-racist educator and an anti-racist science educator, right? I think that these things all collide in my classroom, and I'll get a little more detailed into how, but we know that the impacts of anti-racism are incredible, right? And so important for us as teachers who want our students to thrive. We can just take a second and stare at this. I'm going to take a second to breathe because I talk a lot. Any thoughts, questions coming up for folks? Cool. So I was working with an amazing consulting organization called Kidsall Consulting. There's some really dope educators out of the Bay Area. And they asked me to put together some stuff around anti-racist science education. And so I'm going to share that with you as the lens for today, with the understanding that if we take an anti-racist perspective, that also incorporates gender justice. It also incorporates environmentalism. All of these things are so deeply interconnected. And so for me, an anti-racist approach is kind of my lens into this work, but it incorporates all of it. So when I think about like an anti-racist perspective, I think about BIPOC and student-centered, really empowering curriculum. I think about humanizing assessment practices, and I'm going to explain all of these more. These are kind of esoteric right now. And I think of communities of care. I'm going to go into all of these. Yeah, that graphic is amazing, right, Marini? I should credit it. I can't remember where I got it from. Sorry. I did not create it. But so for me, before even teaching science, I spend 2 weeks creating community in my classroom. Because I think in order to really authentically learn and be curious and be vulnerable and make mistakes and, come up with theories and be that scientist, we need to feel safe. We need to feel safe. And so I think, let's take a little break. Think back to your favorite teacher, any age group, right? So you could have been little, you could have been middle school, high school, college. Share in the chat box, what were some things that made you love that teacher? What were things that made you love that classroom? Feel free to come off mic and share, or share in the chat.
Can I share? My favorite teacher one of my favorite teachers was my third grade teacher. Her name was Mrs. Korn with a K. And I can remember her so vividly. She just had this amazing ability to have so many different enriching things happening at the same time. So we learned about her Jewish culture and heritage. She gave us all of these challenging brain puzzles, and I didn't even fully appreciate them at the time, but looking back, I'm just like, wow, everything she did was so intentional. We had these amazing reading, these flexible reading groups. We did so many art projects. And what I remember, a couple of things that really stand out. One is she really let us foster our creativity. And so we would do all of these skits and we would get extra credit. So at lunchtime, my friends and I would just make up these random plays, and I say random, but she would humor us. She would give us the space to go up in front of the class and dramatize some random scenario. And so she let us foster that sense of creativity. And then she had every semester, we had all of these kind of brain teasers and we would accrue points. And so she would take students at the end, I guess the students who had earned the most points, and she would take us on an outing. And so we got to know her outside of school. So I have such fond memories of Mrs. Korn. She's the epitome of a teacher. When I think of a teacher, I think of her.
Uh-huh. Yeah. No, she sounds amazing.
Mhm.
Like all the things.
Yep.
All the things, right? So I'm hearing like you got to be creative. I'm hearing that you got to know her and her authentic self. I'm hearing that like you got to be challenged, right?
Absolutely.
With these brain teasers. So it wasn't like it was just like route memorization. There was like actual challenge there. And that's
Yeah.
so cool. And I think some of the things, and I'm looking at the chat, right? I'm hearing he behaved as a person rather than a professor, right? Um, third grade seems to be a year. Tire lessons into real life scenarios. That's amazing. Oh, that's cool. Didn't seem to be bothered by people. I love that. She was confident, right? Passionate about their subject, connected it to world events. Love it. Wow. So somebody who really invested time in you, Valentine. Apologies if I pronounce that right. Please come off mic and fix me. Um, really cool, supportive, had an open. And so when I think of these, right? Cool. Thank you for that. Got to know you, built relationships, right? I think of these, and oftentimes I think of how in elementary school we have a lot of this. And as the years go by, schooling gets more and more sterile, right? Like, Gustavo, I think you said you had a professor that was human, right? So then to me, that notes on the opposite, that so many other professors don't do that, right? Because at some point in time, we take away the humanness out of our teaching. And I think one of the really important things to remember as educators is that relationships and vulnerability and getting to know our students, and building these connections with us and them and between them too, right, is so key. So like if I ruled the world, I would make all classrooms like elementary school classrooms, you know? Gustavo, hilarious. Yeah, right. Not like a isolated professor. Is that what I'm hearing from your comment, Gustavo? Like not just stoic is what I'm hearing. Please fix me if I'm wrong. Don't know why I had that there. But so when I think about creating communities, right? Some of the things that I've done to create community is base my classrooms on restorative and transformative justice. And that can be Circle. Circle is a Native practice from which restorative and transformative justice practices have been devised. If you look at Circle, it's a space created just to share. It could be sharing on various different topics, and people would be like, well, you have a science classroom. Why are you doing this? And I'm like, because we need relationships in our classroom. We need those relationships to feel comfortable to share our answers, to be creative. Being creative is an incredibly vulnerable practice, and we need to have that safety to be able to be creative. Cool, Gustavo, thank you for that. Restorative and transformative justices, I would really try to take a look into some of those practices. Alternative forms of discipline, I learned the hard way. The traditional forms of discipline, I'll give you an example. I remember my first or second year of teaching, there was a student who wasn't doing work and was, acting out and disrupting the class. And I just started to get on them. I was like, I need you to do this. I need you to do this. And, they weren't having it. And they got up to walk out of class and I blocked the doorway. And they pushed me out of the way and left class, and when I talked to admin about it, admin was like, well, we should press charges because that's assault on a teacher. And I had absolutely no idea that that would go there. First of all, I should have never blocked the doorway. It's really not worth a kid getting arrested or getting into that much trouble. I could have pulled the student outside and said, hey, looks like you're having a rough day. What's going on? Is there anything I can do to support you? Because calling out a student in the middle of class is just going to put their back against the wall and make it worse and escalate the situation. So these are things I didn't know. I never had a class on these things, and I think that we're getting better about talking about these in education, in teacher education programs, but really restorative and transformative justice were life-changing for me. I put hashtag different is the new normal there. Making differences okay. Making, I always ask my students, what would the world be like if we were all the same? It's boring as shit, and there's no creativity and there's no innovation. We need our differences to thrive as a community, and making sure that representation was there. And so I remember having a little pride flag up in my classroom. It was just a tiny little pride flag. And a few years ago, first day of school, one of my students came up to me after class and was just nodding. And you're like, Miss, thanks for having that up there. And students notice these things, just making them feel welcome. Real life is just being true. Like you were saying, Gustavo, they were real. Your professor was a real person, a human. I can be wrong. I can have bad days. I can apologize. I can have great days. And so there's some things I know things about and some things I don't, And I'll share this as well. This was a practice that I started developing, a community accountability. So instead of me being dictator and punisher and all of these things, really working on my students being accountable to each other, I created this little system where each table group was the world. And again, I'm the middle school teacher, right? This is 8th grade. Each table group was a continent of the world. Each person had a role. There was an ambassador of peace. There was a resource manager, a secretary of information, a minister of state, and they all had responsibilities to each other to look out for each other. It wasn't the easiest thing. It takes practice. Kids are used to teachers telling them what to do. But again, going back to my idea of we need to learn how to be together without somebody ruling over us. This was something that I really wanted to invest in, so being accountable to each other instead of just me. I'm going to pause. Any thoughts or questions coming up? I got really good at staring at screens during Zoom school, so I can stare for a minute.
I had to go grab my glasses because in my older age, even with contact lenses, I still have to wear reading glasses. But I just wanted to just kind of comment on just kind of collectively some of the anecdotes and things that you've been sharing and your reflections. I think that is so vital and so important that, you mentioned, that things are getting better in teacher education programs, that we're looking at things from a more equitable, restorative justice lens. So I feel like those pre-service teachers, so those students in our audience now are probably at an advantage over when you or I were going through this process and we were kind of having to figure it out more when we were in the moment. But I think it's just so valuable, all of these moments where you're saying, you're making mistakes, but you're learning, you're growing, you're stepping back from a situation and you're reflecting on it. I just wanted to kind of, acknowledge how powerful that is and how it's not something that we take for granted. I think back on when I first started teaching and I want to cringe at some of the things that I did or didn't do. But, as they say, when you know better, you do better. So I'm just so glad that students are here and they're being able to get the benefit of your wisdom and your experience and kind of your lessons learned from working with kiddos and becoming more social justice minded.
Yeah, thanks, Marini.
Sure.
It's all a process, right? And Brisa, I see your question. Honestly, it was a process. I would say that one of the things that I learned in teaching is that consistency is really important. Whatever system you're going to use, being authentic to it and being consistent to it is really important. And I would say that it took 2 or 3 months to really ingrain this into students. But once it was, my class ran itself. I had something called Freedom Fridays where students would teach the lesson. They came up with the discipline policy. They came up with the lab. They brought in all their science materials for everything. They ran it, they ran Circle every other Friday. So it took a bit of work in the beginning. It really did. And students would also much rather me just punish them. But the long-term investment really paid off. It really paid off. My classrooms became really amazing places to be for the most part. I had rough years still, but they were pretty enjoyable to be in. So that wasn't even science related, right? That's me spending weeks in the beginning of my classroom building relationships with students. And then when I think about BIPOC student, yeah, for sure, Risa. Student-centered, engaging activities, I tried to base all of my science work around things that they were interested in, right? So I was lucky enough I love teaching. I love it's my creativity. It's my art form. I came up with this, somebody sent me this video on Facebook or something, and I watched it and I was like, oh my God, this is going to make an amazing lesson. Can you see this if I play?
Can't get it now. I can't get it now, but I can get it. Can't get it now. I can't get it now, but I can get it. What's up the stairs?
So it inspired me to come up with this atomic dating game, right? Where all my students made, I handed out random atoms to all of my students. They had to make a dating profile for their atom, right? And they had to come up with okay, what are they reactive with based on their electron level? What do they like? They had to put features of various different things on their dating profile, what they're found in. Yeah, it was hilarious. And so they did all these things and then they made them on cards like this, and I put string on them, and they walked around. And I don't know if you remember the Akon song Lonely. Lonely, I'm so lonely. I would play that and they would have to go around the room and make compounds, and they would have to find the atoms that they made compounds with, talk about their atomic structure and mass and all of these things, and then tell me, is it an ionic bond? Is it a covalent bond? All of these things. And it was so fun. It was so fun. And then it was like, you know, there's also so many different like things that you can talk about there, because they'd be like, but miss, I don't want to get with a guy. And we could talk about like queer love, you know, or like polyamory or all these things. Like, what are relationships and do they have to be this one way? And, you know, um, so just thinking of things that are like really silly and engaging and fun. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is like a social justice concept, but it's an engaging activity for students, right? And so for me, it's like, this is part of the work. How do we make science engaging? How do we make it interesting? Another activity that I did, this was for my 6th graders, called Earth and Energy Crisis. I would tell them this is where they get to boss their families around. They have to come up with plans about how to conserve energy in their household. They had to write a plan. They had to like make a whole thing. They had to make a contract with their family members. They had to take data about each of their family members. Like, okay, maybe the plan is to save water by brushing teeth shorter amounts of times, right? So they would have to record who's brushing teeth for how many amounts of minutes, and really like start to be able to boss their parents around or boss their siblings around. And it's like, they loved it, you know, because 6th graders are like, I want to boss people around. Yeah, yeah. So things like that, right? Where it's really engaging and they got to like do something fun. This is like a week-long project. There's something in the chat. Yeah, it was super fun. Yeah, it was really fun. Thanks, Marini, for that. Cool. Other things to discuss, like Earth, global warming, human activity. These are all actually various aspects of California state standards that connect to social justice issues directly, right? So I have content that is specifically social justice oriented, and then there's ways of teaching content that is engaging. Yeah. And so I think it's a little bit of both, right? So it's like, okay, relationships and structures, engaging. I think that engaging piece is in itself social justice, right? Because we're making science accessible to our students and intriguing to our students, and we're making them be the scientists. Dun, 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 dun. Let's see. So humanizing assessment practices. Can I get a quick thumbs up? Who loves taking tests? Well, I'm waiting. I'm waiting. I'm seeing like 2 thumbs and then something in chat. Depends. Yeah. Who, give me a thumbs down if you're not into taking tests. Okay. Seeing a trend. Can see a trend. Right? I'm actually a really great test taker. I'm a great test taker and I don't really mind tests. My sister, who is far more brilliant than I am and super eloquent and very argumentative and is a lawyer, had to take the bar exam 3 times. She is not a test taker. She freezes, she gets nervous. Tests are not for the majority of people, right? Majority of people respond better to art or to essay or to conversation, these things. So how do we really humanize our assessment practices? And I'm realizing there's like 4 minutes left, so I'm going to start going really quick. We're almost at the end. I talk a lot. I did this project called Chemistry for Change. And, you know, students get to research and debate. And so this was debate. Students of all ages love debating each other. They love debating each other. Like, can we argue really in class? Yes, let's do it. And as long as we preface the debate in ways that are respectful and responsible and careful, there's so much amazing stuff that can come out of having debates in class, right? So we did a chemistry unit, and then they had to put it into practice, all their knowledge about chemistry through these debates. There was two groups that focused on greenhouse gases, two groups that focused on environmental racism, fracking, Keystone Pipeline, pesticide use. Another year we did, the drought and almonds. We talked about Flint and what happened with the water in Flint. We talked about Standing Rock and the pipeline. So all these really important actual social justice issues through debate and chemistry. I'm gonna skip this because this is a great film, but this is how I framed like what debate is in my science classroom. It's actually talking about, should Black folk be allowed to go into college? This is The Great Debaters. It's an amazing movie. But I used this clip to show my students what debate is like, but then it also talked about racial justice issues as well. And then the unit, great question. Marini, can you address that?
Yes, I'm typing a response in the chat.
Thank you so much. So the rubric that I created, you can see, right? It has the science here, and the science is weighted double points, and there's neatness and completeness, but creativity and compassion were part of the rubric, right? You were supposed to create a PSA about this issue. How creative were you in your PSA, right? How equal was the work done in the presentation? And my students had to evaluate each other in that as well. So this wasn't a test. I didn't give them a test on chemistry, thanks Marini, but more of a project, right? Where they all engaged. And for me, them getting this information and showing me their knowledge in this way is so much more important than a test that they can memorize. This was like a 2-week project that was really meaningful, and hopefully stayed with at least half of them. Who knows, who knows? Cool. Those were the 3 practices, the 3 pillars of anti-racist education that I focus on. So again, really creating that safe space, really having content that connects to students, and then focusing on assessment practices that move away from test taking. So I'm gonna stop there. Any folks resonate with anything? Do they have any takeaways? Feel free to share in the chat or come off mic. I'm gonna stop sharing. Oh, I will share this. You can feel free to email me here at the Real Talk Project. And you will get a copy of the presentation. You will.
This is Deetra. It was so informative. I didn't know about social justice and framing it the way you framed it. It actually evoked emotions. I always do a lot of self-work, but this really like pulled at some strings here to make me even go back and look at me again. I'm just getting into teaching. And so it made me stop and think, hey, I got to look at me again, even deeper, so that I'm clear on my objectives when I step into the classroom. And I'll be teaching adults, but it's going to be even more important that I look at these things because, as adults, sometimes we carry baggage and they're going to be bringing that into the classroom. So this was deep for me. It was very deep.
That's so dope. I'm so glad to hear it. And I'm hoping that it was deep in a good way. And that
it was
in a good way.
It was. I got to go do some meditation and some breathing and
right?
some releasing. Yeah.
But those growing pains are beautiful and also a struggle. And have you seen that like growth happens out of your comfort zone?
Oh my gosh, for the job, they made me write 5 papers and do a presentation. And one of the things was talking about growth and what it does and stepping outside of the comfort zone. And that was exactly what I wrote about, was how pulling these adults out of their comfort zone means growth for them and how I'm going to convey that to them.
Yeah, it's huge. And for me, like, it's how do we model it as educators too, right? Like, you're doing it right now.
Yeah, and I don't know if I got the job yet, so I'm keeping my finger. I'm like, I hope I didn't do all this work in vain. So that's why I'm here, is because I want to get as much under my belt so I can go back and present to them and say, look, I don't have all the credentials, but I'm making the efforts to show you I'm willing.
Yeah.
But this has been amazing for me. Even if I don't get it, it's been eye-opening.
Thank you so much for sharing those reflections. So appreciated, and sending you so much good luck in the journey.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm looking into the chat really quick. Yay. Building community and being reflective. Awesome. Thanks, Marini, for that. Love these. I'm taking a second to read. Yeah. Valentine. Yeah, that's so dope. Oh yeah, Gustavo, I'll share the presentation. I'll share or Teach LA will share it. So
Yes.
At some point, yeah.
So my understanding, participants, is that all of the presenters are going to be uploading their materials, which would include any sort of handouts that they want to share and PowerPoints that they want to share. They'll be sharing that with the facilitators, so the CPTP group / Teach for LA group. And then if I'm not mistaken, Leia, that's going to then be shared through, is it the Teach for LA website? How would they find those resources?
Yes, that's correct. We will be collecting all the resources from all the presenters, and we will publish it in the teachlarc.org website, and also probably in the CPTP website as well.
Thank you, Leia, and thank you so much, Amreen. We appreciate you so much.
Yeah,
I'm so glad this is recording, so that the recording of the session will also be housed. If you want to go back and review some of the information and be inspired and moved once again, you can do that on repeat.
Well, thanks, Lisa. Thank you all. Really appreciate you being here and sending so much good love and energy for folks on their journey. Excited that this happens and that you're here and that you're interested. And yeah, it's really awesome to see.
Love it, love it. I put the Teach LARC link in the chat. But yeah, hope to see some of you all at some other sessions today or tomorrow. And again, thank you, Amreen. That was amazing and so powerful. And thank you everyone for all of your great questions and participation. See you later.
Bye, folks.
Bye.
Do you need me to stay on, Marini?